Hey guys, so I'm wearing a GoPro on my hat here so I can show you how to make this Earth history chart. There should be some directions on Teams for you to follow, but you can also follow along with me, at least for part of it. Some of it you're going to need those instructions, but I want to show you how to get started. So open the Earth history chart on your computer. And then you're also going to need to gather some supplies. Let me see if I can get my camera set up where I can see what's going on. So you're going to need 3 sheets of paper, a ruler. You'll need scissors, a pencil, and some tape. So the first thing we're going to do is simple enough. We're going to put a title on it. It's going to say Earth history chart at the top. So we're going to look way back in time at the fossil record and the different eras of creatures. And of course you know about the Mesozoic era, which includes the Jurassic period when the dinosaurs lived. You know about other time periods and other fossils as well. But we're going to go back to the beginning of Earth's living history. We're not going to go all the way back to the Big Bang. We're not going to go back as far as the origin of the solar system, but we are going to go back as far as we find signs of life on Earth. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to label each of these lines as 10 million years in length, and we're going to go back in time. So I'm going to label this first line, and we're going to do all of this over here in the margin. We're going to label this as today. So this would be this would be right now. And this next line will be 10 million years ago. So we just go 10 MYA 20. And I don't think we have to put MYA every time, but we're going to count by tens all the way down this page. I think just remember that these are in millions of years. I'm going to put MYA again when I get to 100 there. Now this has taken us back to dinosaur time, but we're going to go back much before this as well. So 110, 120, 130. I'm just counting down farther and farther back in time. So on this one page, I'm going to get, it looks like I'm going to get a little past 250 million years, or 1/4 billion years. I got to 260 at the bottom. Your paper might be different. That's okay if it is. Wherever you ended up, go to your next page. Oh, that's right. Every 100 I want to label MYA, so I'm going back to the 200 and marking that. Let's see, I left off at 260. So what I'm going to do is this is also going to be 260 right here. And I'll show you how that's going to work in a minute. But we're going to start with the same number we left off with, and then we're going to continue on from there. 300 I want to mark million years ago, abbreviation. Pretty straightforward. Now I'm back far enough in time. I just wrote 370 million years ago. I'm back far enough in time that the dinosaurs have not evolved yet. I'm back in trilobite time. Remember we did the lab about trilobites a couple weeks ago. And so trilobites were alive at this time. Fish were alive at this time. But this is before there were any creatures living on land. 500 million years ago. I'm going to keep going. 510. Not too much farther. Okay, the last one I got to on this page, and again, it might be different for you. It doesn't matter. Whatever you ended up with is fine. I hit 530. So that means I'm going to repeat the 530 up here. I'm going to keep going. Now we're almost back to the point where there were organisms, but they did not have any hard body parts. They had no bones, they had no shells, and that means that there are not very many fossils found of these creatures. And since we don't have very many fossils, we don't actually have to go very much farther. I'm going to stop when I get to 650. So you're going to go all the way to 650. However many lines that took you, however many pieces of paper that took you, you can stop when you get to 650. Next thing, I'm going to cut off right here where I had that 260 mark. I'm going to cut off the bottom of the paper, right on that line. And this little strip of paper is now garbage. I'm going to take my 260, which I wrote twice, and I'm going to overlap it with that one. I'm going to cover up the second one I wrote. And that's when I'm going to tape these two pieces of paper together. So I've only got one 260 because I covered the second one, if that makes sense. I want to tape this into a single long sheet of paper now. Uh-oh. Trouble with my tape. So I would like to go all the way across there to hold it together, but that's not going to work for me. I'm going to do the same thing down here. For me it was 530. I don't know what number it will be for you, but it should be around that. And once again, if I had a piece of tape to use, I'm not going to take the time to grab more tape right now. I would tape this together, right? So I end up with this single, very long sheet of paper. Yeah. Single sheet of paper going from today, counting by 10 million years for every line, and ending up at 650 million years ago. I'm not going to cut this off because I'm going to make use of that soon. When you're done, the easy thing to do is to just fold this right on those boundaries. So you'll fold it into 3, and that'll be easy to deal with at that point. Okay? So we've set up our time scale. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to break this time period apart into different eras. These are really large amounts of geologic time, and they're not always a certain length, and in fact they don't always have the same amount of years in them. They're defined by the types of fossils. Like in the middle here, we're going to have the age of the dinosaurs, the Mesozoic era, and before that it wasn't dinosaurs. After that it wasn't dinosaurs either. So what we have to do is keep in mind that these time periods that we're talking about are uneven. It's kind of like when you started school, you might have just spent a couple years in preschool, and then you went to elementary school for like 5 years. You went to middle school for 3 years. You go to high school for 4 years. They're different amounts of time, but they're major events in your life, and these are major events on Earth. So first of all, we need to find 65 million years ago. This is when the dinosaurs went extinct. So it's halfway between the 60 line and the 70 line. Halfway between 60 and 70. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to make a mark halfway between them, all the way across the paper here. At 65 million years ago. And then I'm going to go down and label, I'm going to divide at 225. So halfway between 220 and 30, halfway between there, I'm going to once again make a line all the way across. These are the major eras of Earth history. My next one is at 580. So that's right on the 580 mark. I make a nice line all the way across the page right there at 580. Again, I'm going to tape this on eventually. I just didn't want to take the time to go get more tape. So now we have these three major sections, actually four. The very top, this is dinosaur time, this is before dinosaurs, and this is before there were even solid body parts, when we just had things like jellies and sponges and worms. So we need to label each of these with their appropriate times. So to do this, I'm going to go sideways. And this one on the top is called the Cenozoic era. So I'm going to write Cenozoic era. And it's also known as the age of mammals. Starting 65 million years ago is what we call the beginning of the Cenozoic era, and it's continuing today, and mammals are the dominant life form. So there we go. We're going to do the same thing over here. Dinosaur time is called the Mesozoic era. It'd be really good if you had a pencil with an eraser too, because you probably will want to make some changes. The Mesozoic era, and what these words come from, zo means animal, so meso is middle, so these are the middle animals, or this is the age of reptiles. And then this big long one, this is called the Paleozoic era, which means ancient animals. The Paleozoic era, and we could call that the age of fish and invertebrates. Many invertebrates dominated the landscape at this time. We still have plenty of invertebrates today, like all the insects and things like that. And then the last section, down here below the bottom line, we'd just call this the Precambrian era. Okay. So, let's see, what else do we have here? We're going to label a couple other things with the eras. So, the Precambrian, the age of soft invertebrates. Also, in terms of plants, we're going to label this the age of algae. The only kinds of plants that had yet evolved were the algae. This one, age of fish, and I'm going to squeeze in here the word shelled invertebrates. I should have told you that to begin with. My mistake, I apologize. The age of shelled invertebrates. Also, for the plants, this would be the age of moss and ferns. These were the only land plants at the time. For the age of reptiles, I'm going to add the dominant plants at that time were conifers, trees with cones. And for the age of mammals, our dominant plants today reproduce with flowers. So we're going to add to this age of flowering plants. Okay, so those are our major eras in Earth's history. Today we have the Cenozoic, age of mammals and flowering plants. Before that was the age of reptiles and conifers. Then we had this huge time period. It goes all the way from here to here. I don't know if you can even see my two fingers. There they are. And this is the age of fish and shelled invertebrates. So this is where trilobites lived in this time period. Also the age of moss and ferns. And then before that, we call it the Precambrian, the age of soft invertebrates and the age of algae. So let's look back at the instructions to see what else we're going to do. Okay. Now these eras are subdivided into shorter time divisions that are called periods. Just like we divide the school day into different periods, or you divide elementary school into different grades, these eras are divided into shorter periods. So we're going to label those, but since they're not major time divisions, we're not going to use a line all the way across, just a line maybe halfway across in the center. So first of all, we need to find 1 million years ago, which is not going to be easy because this whole line from today to 10 million years ago, wow, I got to go just 1/10 of the way down. So I'm almost all the way up at the top of this line, and I'm just going to make a small mark like that. That's 1 million years ago. My next line is at... Okay, that's all I need for now. Above this line, we call it the quaternary. That means the fourth period. And below this line, most of the age of mammals is part of what we call the tertiary period. So I'm just going to put that in the middle. So the tertiary period went from 65 to 1 million years ago. Then it switched very recently, only 1 million years ago, it switched to the quaternary period. The dinosaur time is divided into 3 periods that you may have heard of already. The first one we need to find at the 135 mark. Here's 130, 140, halfway in between. I'm not going to go all the way across. I'm just going to go partly like that. 135, and then the other one is at 195. Halfway between the 200 and the 190. And I'm just going to make a line partway across. Above this, this is the Cretaceous period. This is when T-Rex lived. And Triceratops, they're only found in the Cretaceous. Before that was the Jurassic period. And this is when you have some classic dinosaurs like Brontosaurus. And before that, the earliest dinosaurs were in the Triassic. So you see how that works? From here to here is dinosaur time, but it's subdivided into 3 smaller periods. The Mesozoic era includes the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic period, the Triassic period. We find different animals and different plants in these different periods. We do the same thing for the Paleozoic. I'm going to fold this out of my way. So in the Paleozoic, what do we need? First of all, at 285, remember that's below the 80, and then we're going to make a small line. Now this whole time, from 225 to 285, this was called the Permian period. This was actually the biggest mass extinction. It's not as famous. The most famous one was when the dinosaurs died up here, but this one killed off a higher percentage of organisms on the planet, which kind of opened the door for dinosaurs to take over at that point. So this is the Permian period between 285 and 225. Then we have the Carboniferous, when lots of carbon was converted to coal. And that's at the 345 mark. Sorry if the view is a little shaky from me moving my head around as I look from one place to another. So this is now the Carboniferous period. Devonian is next at the 400 million mark, right on the 400. So I just make my line there, and I label the center of that time as the Devonian period. Many of these are named after places in Europe. So Devon is in England. Silurian period, 430. The Jura Mountains are in Germany. That's what gave us the name Jurassic, and so forth. Ordovician, 500. 500 to 430, right. I believe Ordovici or Ordovicia refers to the country of Wales, part of Great Britain. Ordovician period. And then this should be already taped here. Between the Ordovician right there and the beginning of the Paleozoic, this is all the Cambrian period. So now let's see what we've got going on. We put all the times across this side, right? Then we made these big lines all the way across. This one's hard to see right now because I folded the paper there. And these divided up the different eras, right? Here's the other one. We made 4 of those big lines. 4 of these big eras, right? Then we subdivided the more recent ones into periods. We're not going to do that with the oldest ones, though. Only the most recent ones. Okay? So we've set up our paper with the different times, and now we're ready to start labeling some of the events that occurred. So for instance, let me see, I'm just going to choose one. 130 million years ago. So at 130 million, I'm going to go to 130 right there, and the event was that these are the oldest flowering plants. So I'm going to label oldest flowering plants right on the 130 mark. Notice how I left lots of room for labeling other things and for drawing. And so these are the early flowering plants, and so to represent that, I'm just going to draw some kind of plant that has flowers at the top. I'm just going to do a simple daisy. Now some of these drawings are going to be more complicated than that, but every one of these labels should include a diagram to go with it. And you have 2 choices. 1, you draw it yourself. 2, you can go online and print out some images and you can glue them onto this paper. You could even glue them onto the back because you might not have room to put a lot of images that you printed out here. So it's okay to glue them on the back as long as they're at the right place on the page. So for my oldest flowering plants, if I went and tried to find a picture of a fossil and printed it out, I would have to make sure I glued that right there, not up there, not down there. It has to be on the right part of the time scale. So you don't have to draw if you don't want to. You can print everything out and glue it on if you prefer. So looking at this, there's a couple things I want to point out. I chose one that was really easy because it's right in the middle of everything. Okay? Let me see. Are we able to see what I'm looking at? No, we're not. We're just seeing my keyboard. Okay, there we go. So if you're looking at these ones, these are going to be pretty easy for you to do. They're easy to find on the time scale. These ones are going to be difficult because remember, in that first line, it was 10 million years, and we have these events squeezed into that short time period. So the oldest modern human fossils, the Ice Ages, and Australopithecus fossils Lucy and other ape people, those all get squeezed into this one line right here. All of that has to squeeze into the same spot. So we have like oldest modern humans. Actually, that's what defines this line here. So above this line is where we should have oldest modern humans. We've hardly been around at all. Our chart is almost 3 pages long, and we're just in the top line here. We're just this much space of time is how long humans, you're not even seeing it, are you? Sorry about that. Just this little tiny space of time is how long modern humans have been here, above this quaternary line. Squeezed into today. That's it. What else did we have? We have the Ice Ages. And we had Australopithecus. So all of that has to get squeezed in here. And again, this might be a good time for you to print out some pictures and glue them on the back instead of having to draw all these things in this small space. I think it might be cool for the oldest modern humans to have a picture of yourself in there. Although it would be just as valid to print out a picture of some caveman or something, right? And it could be clip art, or it could be a photo of the fossil that they've found, or it could be an artist's conception of what it looked like in life. Any of those would be okay. So that's tricky. Then the rest of these are pretty straightforward, except there's one other tricky set at the very bottom. So let me see, can you say this? Yes, you can. So if you look here, 580 million years ago, we went back to this time of the Cambrian Explosion. And we call it the explosion because it seems like there is an explosion of life because creatures evolved shells. And so all of a sudden we start getting a ton of fossils that we weren't seeing very many before, because before that time they only had soft body parts which wouldn't fossilize very well. So it seemed like an explosion of life in the Cambrian Explosion when we got all these shells, things like snails and coral and clams. And so all of a sudden we start getting lots of fossils because they had hard body parts that could fossilize easily. And it almost seemed like they came out of nowhere. But we have found older fossils without shells. They're just not very common. You have to have just the right conditions to have their soft bodies like worms and jellies and sponges. Everything has to be perfect to fossilize those guys, and they're much older. Now notice, here's some dates that go beyond what we numbered to. We numbered to 650. So for these ones, these 3 important, actually 4 important times, events, you can just draw arrows pointing off the bottom of the page for these guys. And that's why we kept all this extra room after the Cambrian period. We kept all this extra room beyond 650. So what I can do here is I had one at 1,000 million years ago, which is the same as a billion. And that was the first eukaryotic cells. So that was way off the bottom of the page, and I could put a picture of a cell right here. This is a complex cell with a nucleus, right? That's what we mean by eukaryote. It has a nucleus, it has all these other little parts inside of it. So the first complex cells about 1 billion years ago, and we are still eukaryotes today. Then my next big event that was off the page was 2,000 million years ago. In other words, 2 billion years ago. And this one is the first prokaryotic cells. So I'm just going to put these ones at the bottom of this page. First prokaryotic cells, and this was way off the bottom of the page, and these were tiny, simple cells like bacteria. What do I have next? Formation of the solar system. Let me see, what can you see? I'm going to do the same thing for these last two. 4,500 million years ago, 4.5 billion years ago. See how it says BYA for billion years ago? That's the formation of Earth and the rest of the solar system. And then 13.5 million, in other words, 13.5 billion, the Big Bang formed the universe. So for those ones, you're going to do something very similar here. What was it? I'm just going to go 4.5 BYA, and I'm going to go 13.5 BYA. And this is solar system forms. And this is Big Bang. And once again, I'm going to show that these are way off the bottom of the page. Then I need some kind of representation of those things. So I can draw the sun surrounded by the planets orbiting around it, right? Something like that. Or however you choose to show it. This is where you get to express yourself a bit. And then we have the Big Bang forming the universe over here. Maybe you want to look up some possible artistic representations of that event. I'm just going to kind of draw an explosion, not to be confused with the Cambrian Explosion. Okay, so basically what you're going to do is finish the rest of this yourself. You're going to label each of these events at the right time, and then you're going to draw a diagram to represent it. If you get stuck on anything, of course, you can send me an email or you can make a post on Teams. Okay, so what do we need? Labels and diagrams, and then you're done with this. All right, thank you very much. Adios.